This conference will
Bye-bye.
now be recorded.
Thank you very much. We'll begin the Water Policy and Legislation Committee and special meeting of the Board of Directors for the West Basin Municipal Water District for January 18th at 1 o'clock. Call the meeting to order. We do have a quorum. Mr. General Manager, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Chairwoman Gray, we do, but for the purposes of the record, let me call for a roll call. Director Don Deere.
Here.
Chairwoman Gloria Gray.
Yes, here.
Alternate and Director Scott Houston.
Here.
Director Alvarez. And President Williams. Madam Chair, we do have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any public comment?
Madam Chair, we do not have any requests for public comment, though I do see that there are some members of the public that are here virtually. If anybody would like to speak on a public comment, please let us know now.
Anyone from the public who wish to speak?
Madam Chair, we have no requests.
Thank you. Presentations, item 4. Are there presentations?
Madam Chair, staff has no presentations today.
Item 5, action calendar. No action calendar, correct?
That is correct.
We go to information calendar 6A. So would you please present that item?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. As you mentioned, the item is 6A. It's our 2021 West Basin Census Redistricting Update. As you'll recall, back in December, West Basin Municipal Water District did bring an item for the board's consideration for the hire of a redistricting consultant. With approval from the Board of Directors, West Basin staff did enter into an agreement for such services. And if you turn to packet page 6, we do have an initial presentation from our redistricting consultant, which is called the Redistricting Collaborative. And first and foremost, I wanted to let you know that unfortunately our consultants were due in court today, but we wanted to bring this to the committee as soon as possible. And as such, they're not able to be here for the presentation, but they did provide us with this presentation. And I'm going to do my best to go through it for you today, just to highlight some of the issues and at least one concern. And then, of course, I'll talk a little bit about the next steps. So if we can go to the next slide. And then the next slide. So as I mentioned, when we brought this item to the board related to the contract, West Basin staff did provide the consultant with 2 parts to the scope of work that they were working on. First and foremost, we wanted to see if we were in compliance with all state and federal laws, and if so, our hope was to kind of avoid the redistricting process, assuming that there were no drastic changes to the West Basin service area. The second piece of the scope was going to be determined off of that initial analysis, and we do have the majority of that initial analysis for you today. But really what they were looking at was to make sure that the population equality was in order. We wanted to make sure that we would not be close to any violations of the Voting Rights Act. And of course, we wanted to adhere to the equal protection restrictions on racial gerrymandering. Next slide. So when we look at drawing lines, the idea is to have substantially equality within all 5 divisions. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that all 5 divisions must have the exact same population, but you want to make sure that you're substantially equal. Some deviation is acceptable. And the goal in that is that the total deviation should not be greater than 10%. If we go to the next slide. In relation to the Voting Rights Act, we really want to make sure that we do not dilute any racial and language minority voting rights by denying them an equal opportunity to nominate and elect candidates of their choice. And the second bullet there, we actually defined what a language minority is. They're specifically defined in federal law to mean persons of American Indian, Asian American, Alaskan Natives, or Spanish heritage. Next slide. Now, as we look at the divisions within the West Basin service area, we obviously want to make sure that we have cohesive divisions. We try to keep the municipalities intact. And of course, you can see in the upper left-hand corner, we do have the legal definitions there of what's called packing and cracking. And you can see an example of that here with these two boxes where you have equal number of yellow squares and blue squares on the left-hand side. And then as you go across to the right-hand side, you can see that the division that's in the lower left-hand corner is packed with blue, creating one division for blue. And then you can see how the other three divisions have the majority of the yellow, creating a 3-to-1 advantage. Obviously, we want to avoid doing that. Next slide. Now, the 14th Amendment restricts the use of race as a predominant criteria in drawing districts and the subordination of other considerations. And you can kind of see an example on the right-hand side. And there is a note here that bizarrely shaped electoral districts can be evidence that racial considerations predominate. And so obviously you want to avoid that. Next slide. There are obviously several considerations in looking at the divisions within the West Basin service area. You want to look at topography, geography, cohesiveness, contiguity, integrity, and compactness of the territory, and then, of course, a community of interest in the division. Next slide. Additional criteria for consideration is preventing head-to-head contests between incumbents. And I want to highlight this second bullet because this is something that's obviously important to the West Basin service area, as we have 17 municipalities in the service area itself. And it's respecting the boundaries of political subdivisions. So whenever possible, you'd like to keep your municipalities whole. Next slide. Now, as I mentioned, we do have our initial analysis of the West Basin service area. And I apologize that the map is very small. We probably should have asked for a larger map. But I wanted to highlight one thing. If you look in that box on the lower left-hand side of the slide, we do have one initial issue that really jumps out at us. And that is the deviation between the highest division, which is Division 5, they're plus 5.7%. And if you look at Division 2, they're on the lowest end with negative 4.71%. And if you total that up, we exceed the 10% deviation. And that's kind of one of those initial rules that we want to make sure that we adhere to. And with that in mind, West Basin staff is recommending that we move forward with the second part of that scope. And we start to look at how we can correct that deviation with potentially moving some population from Division 5 up into Division 2 or some other slight variation or change to the divisions in order to get us below that 10% threshold. Next slide. You can see the population change from 2010 to 2020. You can see and if you look at the blue, and the darker blue it is, the greater of the declining population, you can see that we did have portions of Malibu, possibly due to the fire, with that reduction in population, but not too much deviation from normal. And then if you go to packet page 17, you can start to see the demographic analysis of the existing divisions. This will be something that we'll want to take into consideration as we look to possibly move some of the population, again, to get us below that 10% reduction. Now, as far as next steps go, you will see that in, I believe it's tomorrow's F&A, our Finance and Administrative Committee, we do have one item for the board's consideration. And that's the creation of a redistricting ad hoc. In doing that, in creating an ad hoc committee, it will allow staff to work with those two board members in a quicker manner. I could bring in the consultants and we could get really working on that as soon as possible. Because as you might recall, there is a mid-April deadline to submit our redistricting lines. So we want to make sure that we do this in not a quick manner, but we want to get as much work as we can done so we can bring this back for the board's consideration. The work of the ad hoc will just be to put together a recommendation as far as how to remedy this 10% deviation, but ultimately it'll be a board's decision as to if or how they want to redistrict. So, Madam Chair, that concludes this item. Again, I just wanted to bring it forward to the committee and board as soon as possible. In an ideal situation, I would have had the consultants here, and I know that they wanted to be here, but unfortunately, due to that court date, they were not able to make it. In working with Chris Skinner from Nielsen Merksimer, who's an attorney, a partner there at that firm, he's providing us with a legal analysis of the divisions. We'll be providing that to the ad hoc and to the full board. And then Daryl Lucian, who's providing just some of the context and some of the concepts as far as redistricting. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hey, thank you, EJ. Are there any questions? Please speak up. I'm on the phone. Or are any Director Deere, any questions?
No, thank you.
Director Houston?
Yes, Madam Chair. I think a couple questions real quickly, EJ, and one of them is, when will the legal analysis be provided to the board?
The legal analysis will be provided to the board later this afternoon.
Okay, so when, so it'll be actually provided to us. You'll send it to us. Is that what you're saying?
I've asked them to, again, as legal counsel, he is preparing a memorandum for our review. He'll be sending that out. I want to make sure that the staff had a chance to review it, and we hope to get it out this afternoon.
Okay. And then I understand, and I looked at that agenda for tomorrow. So tomorrow you're looking at, through committee, proposing the formation of an ad hoc. But please remind me, because tomorrow's a committee meeting, does that mean the ad hoc committee is, what does that mean? Authorized tomorrow, formed, or goes to board meeting?
My understanding from the past actions was that the committee and board ultimately approved the creation of an ad hoc. And then, of course, the board president appoints the members of the ad hoc.
Okay, so does that mean tomorrow, theoretically, the ad hoc could be created or approved on the committee meeting?
I believe we would need to have a full vote of the board of directors. So go through the committee structure, and then, of course, be voted on by the full board.
Okay, that's what I really thought would happen. So tomorrow it's talked about assuming it would get kicked to the board meeting, which is on Monday, as an action item, right? Okay. And then once an ad hoc committee is formed, the president can assign the members. Now, does that happen at the same meeting, or does that come later?
That would be at the president's discretion.
Okay. All this being said, because we're under the gun on the timing here. So when's the due date that we have to let the county, the county know
I believe
of our decisions?
April 17th. So we would have
April 7th.
a full 2 months.
Okay, April 17th.
In March for board approval.
Okay, perfect. And so, and one last question, at least right now, because the consultants aren't here, but we're going to get the legal analysis later today, hopefully, or certainly by tomorrow. Do we have to change anything?
If you look at the demographics, there are things for consideration, and I would prefer to leave that to our legal counsel as far as their memorandum goes. And then, of course, in that first meeting of the ad hoc, if it is created, would be to have the attorney kind of explain some of those considerations that we would want to look at and see exactly how those numbers line up.
Okay, very good. Okay, well, for what it's worth, I thought it was really interesting reading the new information and the data. So, by the way, at some point, can you provide me a copy of just this presentation by itself, EJ? Because right now I have it in the packet, but if you can send me one that's just by itself and print me a copy for some future date, that'd be great.
Will do.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. All right, any other questions or any other discussion? If not, we'll move on to the next item, EJ.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I did want to point out in the early part of that presentation, President Williams did join us, so I wanted to make that noted for the record.
Welcome, President Williams. You're on the line. President Williams,
Yes, I'm here.
did you have any questions?
No, I just would just echo Director Houston. I believe that the two directors who are affected by this are here online right now, and that is you and Director Deere. So I'm good. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, EJ, if we can move on.
Yes, thank you.
Unless it's
The next item we have is item 6B. It begins on packet page 22, and it's a regional census redistricting boundaries update. We want to provide this to you. You can actually look on packet page 22. And what we want to do, you'll notice these maps are somewhat similar to what we've had in our briefing books in the past. As West Basin is considering our redistricting, so too are other local, state, and federal districts. And so we wanted to highlight this. So we have our maps. The first one here is our U.S. congressional districts. And you can see, obviously, there have been some changes to the West Basin delegation. You can see, obviously, we still have Congressman Ted Lieu, currently Congresswoman Karen Bass, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Congresswoman Nanette Berrigan, and Congressman Adam Schiff. You can see also that Congresswoman Julia Brownlee has been pushed up and a little bit north of our service area, but she does have a small portion still. And you can see that division or congressional district 32 up there that has the majority of Malibu and Topanga is now a new West Basin seat. And so we wanted to highlight that for you. Obviously, it's great to have additional representation. If you turn to packet page 23, you can see our California State Senate districts. And you can obviously see Senator Bennett Allen covers all the way up to the north and then all the way down the coastline, Palos Verdes Peninsula. As far east is Gardena. And then, of course, Senator Steve Bradford to the east of that. And then Senator Sidney Comlager right there in the middle with Culver City. So I wanted to highlight that. And then lastly, if you turn to the next page, packet page 24, you can see the new assembly districts. And we'll be incorporating these into our materials for the West Basin service area, especially as we start to brief members of the California State Legislature. I'll have a little bit of information related to that in the state legislative update. If you turn to the next page, packet page 25, you can see the new supervisorial seats for LA County. And obviously this was there was quite a bit of discussion related to this item. You can see that Supervisor Janice Hahn, her representation of the West Basin service area has been shifted a little bit, but she still has a decent portion. And you can see all of the Palos Verdes Peninsula, city of Torrance. If you move further up, you can see Senator Holly Mitchell, who now, Supervisor Holly Mitchell, and you can see that she now represents El Segundo and the entire Beach City community. And then if you go up further to the north, you can see Supervisor Sheila Kuehl, representing the Malibu and Topanga area, as well as West Hollywood. And that concludes the maps that we were providing here. If any of the directors have any comments or thoughts on them, please feel free to share them. You can let me know now. You can shoot me an email. But we're excited to kind of look at it, get a good visual of the changes to these boundaries.
Okay, are there any questions right now or comments? Director Deere?
No, thanks.
President President Williams?
Oh, no, thank you.
Director Houston?
Sure. Thank you, EJ, for this, because I had requested it, and it actually turns out that we got split up a lot more in some ways than I realized to a degree. But regarding the congressional seats, I did notice that this 32 is up there, and do you know who might end up getting that? I mean, it looks like it comes down from the valley. It's kind of this void at the moment because Ted Lieu doesn't go as far north.
Correct. And we'll have to look at some of these races, especially to see how it kind of impacts the West Basin service area. You'll see a little bit of this in our state legislative update where we start to talk about, I think our state lobbyist refers to as kind of the musical chairs as far as one person moving and then kind of these shifts. So we will have to track that and see who will be representing the Malibu and Topanga area. But I'm not.
Okay, yeah. Right, because that's a big change, obviously. The Congressman Lieu doesn't go all the way up there. Let's see. Then also on the assembly map was interesting too, because now Division 4 has 5 different assembly members that are part of our area. So that's going to be really interesting. And of course, I think you mentioned El Segundo. I'm now part of Almir Tsuchi's district where I live. So I'm in the 66th. The beach cities are made whole again a bit, but back to it's kind of the same story, I guess. Well, 42, the 80-42 seat. Do you know who that was right now, or did I miss that?
So that currently is Assemblymember Richard Bloom, but he has stated that he is not going to run for re-election.
Okay.
So it will be changing.
Okay, and then 51 is as well, because that's one where there's already people running for 51.
Correct.
50 basically went away. You got 51 and 42. And so 42, you're right. It's I guess that would be Bloom for now, but later that's going to be somebody else's seat. And then all the other ones we have right now, at least for the time being, look consistent. And then you're going to talk about this maybe in the next report, but Sydney Comliger is going to be, she's running for Congress, I think. So that Senate seat could be up for grabs later. So there's going to be a lot of movement. And lastly, just so you all know, I saw that Bob Hertzberg announced he's running for supervisor in Sheila Kuehl's area at this point. So that's a pretty competitive race. So anyways, but thank you for this. A lot of changes that I know you guys will be helping us work on as we get acquainted with our new folks when the time is right.
Correct. And Director Houston, just to point out too, one of the additional changes that I see on that assembly map, if you turn to packet page 24, you can see that Assemblymember Patrick O'Donnell, who represents a very, very small portion of the West Basin service area, now has a substantial portion of Carson area. So that'll be significantly new.
I saw that. And I don't know, I think I heard he's not going to run for the election. I don't know if that was accurate, but I thought I heard he's retiring. But anyways, wow. And then one last question, I guess, on this, because some of this really doesn't go into effect, I think, until the actual elections happen, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Isn't that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you. These are excellent. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, EJ, can you move on? And Director Deere, can you please take over? I have to get off for a few minutes, please.
Sure, I'll take over the meeting.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Let's move on, EJ, to the next item.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman Deere. I'm going to begin item 6C, and then of course we're going to have Matthew Vey join us for the federal affairs update. But if you turn to packet page 28, you can begin to see the memo that was prepared by Neomel Pappas and Associates. I really wanted to highlight this for you. You can see in that initial paragraph, we're always looking, obviously, to conduct quite a bit of outreach with our legislators, and especially because of the COVID pandemic, it's been a little bit of a dry period as far as really getting out there and meeting with our legislators, briefing them on some of the things that West Basin's been doing, and we're really looking forward to kind of a return to normalcy. I had conversations with our representatives. Talked about it a little bit here in this committee, talking about getting up to Sacramento and getting some of those meetings in where we can again brief our legislators. And unfortunately, it looks like right now with the Omicron variant, that's still making things a little bit difficult as far as meeting with our legislators. You can see there that at this time, with several members of the California State Legislature actually having to be quarantined and testing positive, they're only allowing one staffer in the office at a time. That obviously makes it difficult to do these things, but of course, even some of the members are now participating in their committee meetings virtually. So in the Senate, they've allowed it. In the Assembly, it's a case-by-case basis with each a chair of each committee allowing it or wanting the members to be there. This is a little bit compounded by the fact that there's a great deal of construction being done in the Capitol. So actually, a lot of those offices are actually moved over. If you've ever been in Sacramento over where the Speaker's Office of Member Services is, they actually have a lot of those offices over there. So we're going to continue to work with our lobbyists. Jamie Miner has been talking a little bit about scheduling these meetings. You can see in the board memo that it looks like this is probably going to continue into February as far as this limited access to those offices is concerned. We'll have to gauge it then, see exactly what type of access. But obviously meeting in person with our legislators provides such great value that we're going to continue to monitor this situation, and I'll be briefing this committee regularly as far as when we can get up there and meet with our legislators. Obviously, when the California State Legislature returns to Sacramento each year, the first thing everybody expects to see is the governor's proposed budget. He did, in fact, deliver that on January 10th. As noted in the board memo, it does provide a significant funding for COVID recovery and pandemic support, building up reserves, which was obviously a crucial part of the Brown administration, healthcare infrastructure, and addressing climate change. But the real focus, and you've heard a lot about it within the water industry, has been that projected surplus that they identified last year. And when you looked at it from last year, they were expecting a $31 billion surplus, and they're now actually anticipating a $45.7 billion surplus. That's pretty significant funding. And as California steps further and further into this drought crisis, we are expecting potentially $750 million to be dedicated towards drought resilience and the response efforts. You can see there that we've tried to compartmentalize the water conservation programs, should receive about $180 million. Multi-benefit land repurposing, $40 million, and Metropolitan Water District has always done an amazing job of working with agriculture users and different aspects of land repurposing to save and conserve water. You can see the groundwater recharge has $30 million, on-farm water conservation, $20 million. And then, of course, drought contingency, $250 million is a drought contingency set aside to allocate as part of the spring budget process. Now, this is the governor's first effort to introduce his proposed budget bill. But you will see that the California State Assembly and the Senate will obviously introduce their own bills in their budget committees, and that'll have to go through the legislative process for ratification in June. But we're going to continue to track this because I know that the industry is extremely engaged. West Basin has already begun our efforts working with our stakeholder groups, including the Association of California Water Agencies, California Water Reuse, Cal DCEL, and AWWA. We obviously want to see that money is dedicated for the purpose of investing in new local water supplies, and West Basin will continue to track that. If you can look back down on the bottom portion of packet page 29, and this goes a little bit to some of the comments that Director Houston just made, we are starting to see that the 2024 term limits, you may recall several years ago when they kind of reconfigured the term limits for California State Assembly and Senate, allowing a member to serve all in one house rather than those jumps. We did have a historic freshman class. More than half the California State Assembly were new members. And with that looming deadline or that term limit of 2024, you are starting to see a lot of legislators look for their next spot. So we are anticipating a significant special election. You can see that the primary has been called for April 5th, and then the runoff will align itself with the primary election on June 7th. You can see just some of the vacancies that are coming about. You can see obviously that Senator Kamlager is included in that, as she is expected to run for a different office. And so we're going to just continue to track, obviously, the West Basin service area, but also the makeup of the California State Legislature, because it does have significant impacts to water and environmental committee structure. So we'll continue to track that. But you can see the musical chairs there, if you will. And this, of course, once one member moves, you start to see a lot of shifts. So as we continue to see these, and as Director Houston mentioned, when you hear about somebody like Hertzberg, when we hear that he will no longer be serving, you start to look and see how that's going to impact the rest of the service area. If you turn to packet page 30, I just wanted to highlight two specific bills. Obviously, last year was the front year of our 2-year legislative session. So any bill that was not passed back in 2021, members will have a new option or new opportunity to move those bills. And I did want to highlight that Assembly Bill 1195 related to Southern Los Angeles County and regional water agencies. That obviously was related to the Central Basin Municipal Water District Service Area, but it was actually introduced based off of a UCLA study that looked at both the West Coast and Central groundwater basins. And so we've been contacting their author, Assemblywoman Garcia, to see if in fact she intends to move that bill. I have been notified by Central Basin Municipal Water District that they are looking at running legislation themselves and looking to see if they can get funding for groundwater cleanup and safe and healthy drinking water in the Central Groundwater Basin, which was a key aspect of that study. So we'll continue to monitor that. And then I also want to highlight Assembly Bill 1434 by Assemblywoman Friedman. This legislation was introduced last year and would actually reduce the statewide mandate goals or targets, if you will, of indoor water use. And you can see that legislation that passed a few years back, Assembly Bill 1668, Senate Bill 606, included a 55, what they would call GPCD, gallons per capita per day for indoor water use. And her hope was to ratchet that down to 52.5 and then ultimately down to 44 beginning in 2025. So obviously you can see there in the note that several agencies did express their concerns related to that legislation. It is not known at this time whether she plans to move this bill, but I do know that there was a study that was just released talking a little bit about where they thought that gallons per capita should be. So we'll continue to track that, obviously working with our stakeholders. Last but not least, before I hand it off to Matt, you can see at packet page 32, we are in the process of putting together our initial tracking sheet. So as the legislation continues to get introduced, we're going to continue to track everything. You can see a handful of bills that were holdovers from last year, but we are populating that with additional searches. And so you'll start to see this list finalized, later in February. But we did want to get it out to you as soon as possible. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have on the state legislative update. Otherwise, I'm going to hand it off to Matt.
All right, are there any questions on the state update?
No, thank you.
No. Anyone else? I guess not. Okay, go on, please, EJ.
Okay, Chairman Deere, if you can turn to packet page 49, you'll see our federal affairs report. And for this, I'm going to hand it off to Matthew Vey.
All right, thank you, EJ, and Director Deere and members of the board. I'll be taking you through the federal update. A little on the light side today, as Congress is just starting to get back into session, but we're hoping that we'll start to see some action on some pretty major items in the next month or two. So the House returned to their session last week on January 10th, and their primary focus has been on resuming the Build Back Better Act discussions. That's the social infrastructure legislation that they've been working on. And then they're also working on some voting rights issues. And so the Build Back Better Act continues to be stalled for the time being as discussions between Congress and the White House have been struggling to make much forward progress right now, but they're hoping that will kind of move forward here pretty soon. And similar to what's happening in California, Congress is currently keeping a light calendar and agenda due to a number of COVID infections that have hit both the House and the Senate. And again, similar to California, many of the lawmakers are participating in meetings and committee meetings on a virtual basis right now. I mentioned this last month, but the government is currently operating on a continuing resolution, which is a temporary funding measure that currently goes through February 18th. So there's a hope that Congress will eventually reach agreement on the fiscal year 2022 appropriations bills as a substitute funding measure, as a kind of the traditional official funding measure. And this is where West Basin has about $3.8 million that's carved out for 2 of our recycled water projects in Carson and Gardena. So that's our primary hope, but there's still very much a possibility that a full 1-year continuing resolution will end up being the kind of the funding vehicle that moves forward if they're unable to find consensus. And even though those 2 recycled water projects are in those draft appropriations bills, there's still other scenarios where West Basin could receive work plan funding. So it's a kind of a different vehicle, either through the infrastructure package that was recently passed or through the longer term, the 1-year continuing resolution. So we and our federal lobbyists are monitoring this very closely, and we'll make sure to update you as that kind of evolves. The other thing I just kind of wanted to mention is that there's similar to the topic that EJ mentioned earlier, there's a number of long-serving lawmakers that have indicated they either plan to retire or seek other office at the end of either during or at the end of this 2022 session. The one that was mentioned, I believe, by Director Houston was Karen Bass in the 37th Congressional District. She will be running for the mayor of Los Angeles. And as Director Houston mentioned, Sydney Kamlager, who's the current California Senate seat there in the West Basin service area, has indicated that she plans to run to replace Representative Bass. Also, a couple other representatives that aren't in the service area but are adjacent to us, that have been friends to us in the past, have supported our recycled water and other projects. We have Alan Lowenthal, who is from the Long Beach area, and then also Lucille Roybal Allard, who's been serving for about 30 years, who represents the East and Southeast LA County. So their districts were actually merged due to the redistricting, and there was the loss of the California congressional seat, and so their districts were merged, and so they'll both be retiring at the end of this session. And then as the general manager mentioned, staff will continue to keep the board apprised of other changes in the political landscape, both within the congressional districts, the supervisorial districts, and then all of the state districts. As people run for other offices, announce their candidacies, we'll be sure to let you know about those things that are happening that affect our service area. So with that, that concludes my federal update, and I'm available for any questions that you might have.
All right, Director Williams, any questions?
Just a quick one here. Could you refresh my memory on the on being able to run for a congressional seat and not living in the congressional district? Is that true? Is it still that way?
I'm not familiar with that. My understanding is that you do need to be in the congressional district, but I don't know if the general manager has any other information on that. If not, we can certainly look that up and
No,
provide.
man, you don't have to say right now, but if you could find that out for me, I would appreciate it.
We'll be happy to do that.
Response.
Okay, my belief is that you still have to live in the state, that's all. But anyway, Director Houston, do you have any questions?
Oh, yes, I do. And for
Okay.
Congress, you don't have to live in the district.
Congressional district.
Right.
Okay,
For the
very
state office, you do, correct. So yeah, Congress is the only exception. I did have a couple questions or comments, I guess, combo. So I hear you loud and clear. I don't see us having any opportunities to travel to either Sacramento or DC, probably, this whole spring. I just don't see that happening. Plus, everything's so locked down, both in Washington and in Sacramento. Every time you turn around, I don't see any of that stuff panning out. So I do think maybe in the next month or two, we should, come together with our strategy of if there's any key briefings or certain people we need to meet with, and if nothing else, maybe there's sometimes if it's one director, two directors, just so we can be efficient to meet with key people as legislation's moving through. So this is just a thought ahead of time, Matt and EJ. But unfortunately, I just see nobody getting able to travel anywhere in this whole pandemic. And of course, it's just like constant chaos in these legislative offices because people getting COVID. But anyway, back to this. Now, one thing I would like to ask, I think that we should look in the next 1, 2, or 3 months. Obviously, I think between our state lobbyists and then our federal lobbyists, they probably should come online and give us a firsthand presentation. I'd ask that. Obviously, it'll help in another month or two because people will know a little more what's going on. And ultimately, that's going to be more to talk about any legislative things, because Sacramento will probably be pretty busy this year, but I don't think Washington's going to be very busy, at least once the summer hits, forget about it. But let's think about getting those 2 sets of lobbyists to come give us some presentations. And then the last thing, and I didn't hear anything on this in the reports, might be in the letter. What about the State Water Resources Control Board, that decision on the conservation mandates and or fines? Can you all let us know what that was, as well as is there any thought that might affect our retailers just yet?
So there's 2 aspects to the actions by the State Water Resources Control Board. They did adopt water use efficiency mandates. That's basically the prohibition of wasteful uses of water. This is very similar to what happened in the last drought, including washing off your pavement and certain key actions to try to conserve water. But also later this year, we do anticipate the State Water Resources Control Board will adopt their water use efficiency targets. And those were those urban water retailer targets that were adopted under AB 1668 and SB 606. And our retailers will be required to report and comply with those targets by 2023. So you'll see that happen later this year. But as far as the prohibition on wasteful uses of water, that's just a tool for our retailers and our municipalities to really get out the word and make sure that people aren't doing things with water that they shouldn't at this time.
Okay. Did that go into effect immediately when they did that?
I believe it did. The wasteful uses of water, correct.
Oh, okay. So we should start even our own community seeing some messaging from our retailer.
Correct. And there's actually an action today. The city of Manhattan Beach is looking at their stage 1 of their water shortage contingency plan. So they actually have a council item there. It does limit the use of water for outdoor landscaping and, of course, wasteful uses of water as well.
And I would say, Director Houston, that we've also received inquiries from a couple of our other cities about those new state water board regulations. So we are working to educate and support their efforts in messaging out that information to their cities.
Okay, really excellent. Can I ask on the next month if you all can just put together a roster of what what you're aware of from between the cities and the retailers, the privates, of what actions they've taken or not, because I haven't seen or heard anything in the city of El Segundo. That doesn't mean they didn't say something yet, but I haven't seen it. Good to hear Manhattan Beach talk about tonight. And one of the things that, for example, remember West Hollywood, they don't have any recycled water in those areas, so the medians pretty much stopped getting watered. So it's going to be back an issue like it was the last time we had to do this. But if you guys could, I think next month, can you just give us a little roster of what each of the retailers are doing, maybe the city, so that we're aware of how seriously, especially when
Sure, we can do that. And we also have FAQs on our website that we've been providing to our retailers as well, that we've been communicating with.
Okay, great.
And then I know you had a couple other questions, Director Houston, in regards to the lobbyists. I believe we're targeting March to have them provide updates to the committee or the board. I think we still need to work out those details, but I think that would give us enough time to make some progress both in the state and the federal levels. And so we've already indicated to them that we were planning to have them come and provide updates in March timeframe.
Nice. Okay, that sounds good. All right, that's all I've got. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right.
Is that opening the floor, Stacey? Is that okay?
Who's speaking? I'm sorry, was someone speaking?
No, I think there's some background noise.
Okay. Well, let's go on EJ to item 6D then, Metropolitan Water District report.
All right, Chairman Deere, as you mentioned, item 60 is our Metropolitan Water District report. It begins on packet page 54. And for this presentation, we do have Tammy Hurley-High here for the presentation. Take it away, Tammy.
Thank you, EJ. Good afternoon, Chairman Deere, Director Houston, and Director Williams. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So this Metropolitan report, it starts on page 54 of the packet. As you know, every month we provide a status on activities and recent actions. And this one is highlighting the action from December. Earlier this year, the Bureau of Reclamation declared a shortage allocation among the river water users. And as a result, for the past few months, the lower basin states have been working together to develop plans to sustain the levels in Lake Mead. So regarding the lower basin drought contingency plan implementation, the Metropolitan Board had approved and authorized the general manager to enter into a memorandum of understanding between the lower basin states, the users of the Colorado River. And this is a commitment to add additional water in Lake Mead, and of course, in an effort to avoid Lake Mead from further declining into critical low levels. And they have named this the 500 plus plan. And this will allow agencies to take necessary steps with the goal to add 500,000 acre feet of water to Lake Mead during both years, 2022 and 2023. So up to 1 million acre feet. And so it's programs like these that offer a lot of conservation program, new opportunities for a lot of the users in this area. So as I mentioned, As a result of the August 24-month study, it had forecasted Lake Mead decline to fall below 1,030 feet within the next 2 years. And so this is one of the provisions, this MOU, is one of the provisions of the drought contingency plan, which is set to expire in 2026. This MOU commits the non-federal parties of the 3 states, which include California, Arizona, and Nevada, to collectively contribute $100 million. And then they will have a federal match on the non-federal funding in the amount of $100 million. So Metropolitan will provide up to 20% of the funding, and that is not to exceed $10 million per year in both years 2022 and 2023. And as you know, during our caucus meeting that we had earlier this month, we were fortunate to have Bill Hazenkamp from Metropolitan to provide information on his presentation. And as he mentioned, there was a signing ceremony among the parties on this MOU during the Colorado River Water Users Association conference last month in Las Vegas. And I've included a link to the press release if you want to take a look at that as well for that particular item. And then next is a land fallowing program. So another development Metropolitan has recently been working on is new seasonal land fallowing program with the Quechua tribe. And this is another example of a program that will conserve water supplies from the Colorado River that will help protect Lake Mead ultimately. And Metropolitan will pay to fallow a portion of their irrigated land during the spring and summer months during year 2022 and 2023. Metropolitan has formalized an agreement at another signing ceremony at the Colorado River User Conference last month. And I've included a link in the report as well for more information on the press release that they have issued. So Metropolitan's very busy with partnerships last month. Additional partnership programs include agreements with agencies in California. This includes the San Bernardino Valley Water District, the San Diego County Water Authority, and semi-tropic water districts. So Metropolitan has entered into an agreement with the San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District that will allow for water supply exchanges between the 2 agencies. And this agreement will also encourage San Bernardino Valley's local agencies to shift to local supplies to make available additional supplies from the State Water Project to the Metropolitan Water District. And then also the agreement between Metropolitan, the San Diego County Water Authority, Semi-Tropic Water Storage District, and DWR will allow for exchanges and preserve limited State Water Project supplies for the exclusive areas within Metropolitan service area that are solely dependent on those State Water Project supplies. So the next item is the achievements in conservation, recycling, and groundwater recharge. As you know, each year Metropolitan is required to submit an annual report to the California State Legislature to report on achievements in water conservation, recycling, and groundwater recharge. So Metropolitan held a public hearing during the Water Planning and Stewardship Committee last month to receive public comment and feedback. And so this report includes an achievement scorecard with a summary of programs during the last fiscal year. And they have highlighted a few items that include Metropolitan has provided $17 million in rebates. They continue to provide rebates to high efficiency toilet retrofits for the underserved communities. They funded $15 million to member agencies under the Local Resources Program. And they have received support from member agencies and local agencies for the Regional Recycled Water Program. And of course, they continued their work with the state water contractors to fund important science studies and habitat projects in the Bay Delta. And this report is being finalized, and they will be submitting this by February 1st. And for more information and to see a copy of this report, a link has been provided as well. So moving on, and included in this report are the December board meeting actions under attachment A, and that begins on page number 58. And also included is a listing of the board meeting votes. That is under attachment B, which begins on page 61. And also is a draft of a list of items for the January meeting that can be found on page 62 of the committee packet. And lastly, just moving on to the water supply update. Included in this report are the graphics that depict the current water supply condition as of January 2nd. And just a brief summary, the first page shows a lot of improvement compared to information that we were looking at last month. So on the left side, the conditions for the State Water Project, the storage of Lake Oroville's reservoir is about 39% of its total capacity, with 1.3 million acre feet in storage. And then on the right side, for the Colorado River Basin, the graph shows Lake Mead to be about 34% capacity, and the elevation is at 1,066 feet. So the highlights of the chart summarizes the initial State Water Project allocation to be 0%. However, the Department of Water Resources, they're operating supplies to deliver enough water to meet the health and safety needs to the State Water Project contractors that do not have enough water locally available. And the amount of these supplies is determined to be limited to 55 gallons per capita per day. So these health and safety delivery parameters may be needed through the end of March if dry conditions do not continue to improve. The precipitation and snowpack in the upper Colorado River Basin have increased substantially. And for California, the snowpack is showing 150% of normal and 55% of the April 1st average. And this is a result of DWR. They conducted the season's first manual survey of the snowpack on December 30th. So next on the second page, shows the storage reserves for their two watersheds. And in the green shaded area, the 8-station and 5-station precipitation indexes are showing much improvement, and they are higher than the total for last year. And the Oroville storage chart depicts an increase in the storage levels. And a few months back, last August, I had mentioned that the Lake Oroville set a record low elevation level. It was so low that they had to take the Hyatt power plant offline due to water levels falling near the minimum necessary to generate electricity. So that power plant has now returned to service as of a couple of weeks ago on January 4th. So for conditions along the Colorado River, the graph on the left shows the upper Colorado snowpack is now above normal snowpack water content to date. So that's pretty much it. In summary, the recent storms have really improved the state's drought conditions, particularly in Southern California, but major reservoirs still remain below the normal storage levels. So that concludes this report, and I would be happy to address any questions that you may have.
Any questions, directors? Apparently not. Thank you very much for a good report.
Thank you.
Director Green, are you on board now?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am,
Well,
Director.
I'll turn it back over to you then as chairperson.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. We're on the last item, our closed session. I believe we're on. Any closed session, EJ?
Madam Chair, we have no closed session items today.
All right, thank you. Director's comments. Director Deere, any comments?
No further comments. Thank you.
President Williams?
He's not on.
Okay, Director
No,
Houston?
thank you. I'm sorry.
Oh, all right. Thank you, President Williams. Director Houston, any comments?
No comments. Thank you.
Right. Well, my comments, thank you to the interim general manager and the staff this morning for their reports. And is there anything else, EJ?
Not at this time.
All right, thank you. All right, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you everyone for being here. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.